I'm just going to leave it.
Well, we are we are live, and I'd like to welcome all of you who are watching with us on our YouTube channel. Really excited and pleased to have with us our special guests for this month's free public lecture series. As you may know, the public lecture series by GCAS is designed to confront campaigns that are purposefully communicate disinformation in a way that could vitiate against expertise, giving and offering up accounts that are important for the public to know.
One second. Sorry. Mom?
Mary, could you mute yourself? We're live. Mary, I'm going to mute you. Okay, great. So Mary joined us. That's wonderful. And Professor Snow's with us. And so our public lecture series is designed to provide free information from experts such as our guest today and others as well. And so we're really excited about having Professor Snow. I'm going to introduce him now, and then he'll give a lecture, and then he'll entertain your questions, and we'll have a conversation. This actually is also part of a bachelor's program, our BA/MA program. So our students are also going to be joining us in the Zooms as well, which I didn't tell Nathan about beforehand. Sorry about that, Nathan. But let me introduce you now. And so great. So our guest today is Nathanael Snow, who is an assistant teaching professor at Ball State University in Indiana. He received his PhD from George Mason University just last year in 2019. His research interests include public choice economics and political economy of informal social groups, the history of economic thought, particularly the life and the works of Archbishop of Dublin, Richard Whately. He also focuses on industrial organizations and the economics of religion, which is fascinating. Past research that Professor Snow has done includes he's co-authored studies on the effect of foreign direct investment abroad on domestic employment and rapid growth of large firms over sustained periods of time in India and China. Additionally, Dr. Snow has provided economic consulting services on matters concerning international intellectual property enforcement, smart grid technology development, very interesting, and standard essential patent infringement on smartphones. So you can see he does a lot of really interesting things. So I'm really excited about having him give a talk for us today. He has consulted with candidates from every major American political party, and his dissertation investigates the political economy of informal social groups and the reconciliation of groups through deliberation and exchange of sympathies. It's with a great honor and pleasure to welcome you, Nathan, today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. It is my pleasure to be here and to share with you my thoughts regarding how experts should be engaged in the larger constitutional and democratic conversation. So I'll begin by asking, what does it mean to participate in a democracy? I submit to you that a democracy is not characterized by voting, but by discussion. I often tell my students that voting is the least expensive way to participate in a democracy. It costs nearly nothing to go to a polling place and cast your vote. It costs even less to vote by mail-in ballot. It shouldn't surprise anyone then that when the cost of voting is reduced, the quantity of people voting increases. However, it should also make sense that if voting is inexpensive, it's also not very effective. There are a number of reasons for this, many explained by scholars working on public choice economics. For example, if 3 people are voting on where to have lunch, and all have differently ranked preferences, we might not be able to come up with a decision. Voting may not determine a particular choice. Voting can be indeterminate. In the 2016 United States presidential election, Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. Some may see this as a flaw in the peculiar US system. However, it's possible that if the president were determined by popular vote rather than through the Electoral College, then both campaigns might have prioritized their campaign spending differently so as to win the popular vote. That is, as economists like to say, people respond to incentives. Changing to voting procedures will simply result in changes in strategies, both among voters and among candidates. Well, because voting is inexpensive and ineffective, people are not very careful when voting. How many people understand what a particular candidate's position is on import tariff rates, on cosmetology licensing laws, on subsidies for industry or education? We pay attention to some issues more than others. In particular, we pay attention to issues that are expressive in nature. Expressive issues are those that we think are important, but that do not directly affect us economically. Overwhelmingly, people vote as a way to demonstrate commitment to their tribe. Abortion, immigration, and similar issues are important, but voting is unlikely to make major social changes about those issues. Some have compared expressive voting to cheering for a football team. You show up to the game and cheer, but your individual cheering does little to influence the outcome of the game. Your cheering is more a form of expressive consumption than an instrument in the production of the outcome of the game. If no other fans cheered but you did, you would have a bigger impact, and the same is true with voting. So, for a healthy democracy to survive, and if any one among us living in a democracy wants to have a greater impact than simply shouting at a footy match, then we need to do something other than vote. Also, if most different voting mechanisms suffer from indeterminacy, then voting might be futile. For me, living in Muncie, Indiana, voting on anything other than the most local of elections is very unlikely to have any impact whatsoever. So I don't vote. However, the problems involved with voting can be treated as a feature rather than a bug. Rather than concentrate on elections, we can have greater influence on the governance of society by participating in the broader civic conversation. I can go to the city council meeting and speak up for my neighborhood. I can challenge the expenditures the local sheriff requests approval for in public, pushing against the militarization of the police. I can write an op-ed that explains why a particular new policy won't have the intended results and will likely run over budget. Any of these actions will have the same influence as dozens, if not hundreds, of votes. And voice exercised in this manner is more likely to be well informed about the relevant costs and benefits of the policies under discussion. However, such discussion is also likely to be vulnerable to special interest action. If there is a discussion about subsidies for farmers, it is more likely that farmers will show up than that computer programmers will participate. Consequently, a subsidy will seem like a good idea to politicians facing such appeals. For every issue that disproportionately affects a few, whether to harm or benefit them, those individuals are more likely to become engaged than the rest of us for whom the consequences are likely to be small, since the cost or benefit to us will be spread over many, many more people. Then we might want to put some sort of constraint into place that prevents policies that disproportionately affect the population in one way or another. Such constraints are constitutional in nature because they limit what kinds of laws and regulations can be created rather than addressing a particular law or policy. However, we then face a potential problem of infinite regress. How shall we decide on a constitution? a set of rules for making rules without a set of rules regarding how to develop a constitution. With a long enough time horizon, we might be able to see beyond that regress. One could analogously ask, how can the price of any particular good or service be discovered until the prices of all alternative goods and services are first known? Within that nugget of an analogy, we solve both equations simultaneously because we understand that the prices of goods and services are discovered through a market process of what Adam Smith described as higgling and bargaining, with each price constantly in tension, and with the exchanges among us, those consummated and those annulled, each providing each of us some understanding of what prices might be offered, accepted, and rejected the next time we go shopping. To go shopping is quite different from going buying. When we shop, we don't know what we're looking for. We have to be offered something we might want. Like Steve Jobs said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. Well, of course, he got lucky. Other entrepreneurs also offered things to people that they didn't want. When we shop, we do not merely look for the things we want. We often look for the things we hope our friends will approve of us having. We seek the approbation of our peers. And that approbation is transmitted through the way they speak to us, whether they laugh at our jokes, their body language, and all the other practices that we show when we perform what I call our shared repertoire. An exchange can be understood as a reconciliation regarding the different subjective values each of us places on a good or a service. If exchanged voluntarily and with symmetric understanding of expectations, both parties benefit from an exchange. Archbishop of Dublin and former Oxford Don Richard Whately took the New Testament term katallassou, which was used for both exchange and for reconciliation, as the name that he would have preferred over the term political economy to name the discipline that we now just call economics. Economics comes from the term oikonomia, or household management, having a hierarchical and top-down connotation. Catallactics has a fundamentally egalitarian source. It treats the street porter and the philosopher, who played together as boys but chose different paths, as having the same fundamental human dignity. A conversation is also an exchange. In a conversation, we each have opportunity to transmit our approbation or disapprobation of our counterparty's performance of the shared repertoire. We might be talking about something as mundane as the president's most recent tweet, but to talk about it in a manner that does not fit our shared repertoire will be met with the transmission of disapprobation. Henceforth, our conversation can become awkward. We may be completely unwilling to talk to each other going forward. We could each retreat to others who grant us the approbation we desire. The repertoire each of us performs in our peculiar settings is a sort of tacit social contract. It's constantly changing and fluid, like a market of goods and services. We renew the contract, the constitution of our interactions with every meeting, like people who go to mass daily. Or like the Greek gods who deigned to intervene in the lives of men just to get a whiff of ambrosia, the burning of animal bones, dog food, really. We also desire the approbation of men. Our shared conversation, how we talk to each other, that's the true core of civilization. If we desire a liberal way of life, if we desire an egalitarian dignity for each person, if we desire a constitution that protects us from tyranny, then we might start by watching our tongues. The way we talk shapes the sorts of rules we develop in relationships, in markets, and in politics. For fair exchanges to obtain, to avoid foul exchanges, we must attend first to the proper exchange of sympathies. The study of catallactics, including the exchange of sympathies, is the proper field of investigation for the political economist. The catallactic approach provides insight into the way constitutions develop within a polity, within formal associations and within informal contexts. The catalactic perspective sets constraints on the participation of the political economist or any other expert in policy discussions. The marvel of human exchange, the mutual gains obtained from exchange, and the patterned behavior that emerges through repeated exchanges, including exchanges of sympathy through performance of the repertoire over time, describe the central insights that political economy specializes in. Catalactics implies more than reclusive benefits obtained by each party to an exchange, but also an exchange of sentiments. Legislation, apart from the exchange of language, the medium of sentimental exchange, fails to identify a set of collective ends consistent with liberal principles. A liberal order will emerge if the deliberative process is liberal in nature. The institution that obtains is determined by the process by which the agents internal to that institution deliberate over the rules of that institution. The agents themselves need not be angels, but only when, if perhaps by accident or survivorship, that conversation follows liberal rules, will we obtain a really liberal order. Liberal democratic governance is most likely to emerge from a conversation that is open to everybody with free entry and exit, that is focused on the instrumental actual policies and their outcomes rather than expressive or tribal or symbolic action. It also needs to be transparent with no secret conditions that will only be revealed after the conversation takes place. The result then would be a conversation that is deliberative rather than decisive, egalitarian rather than hierarchical, and always mutually beneficial. Apart from a liberal foundation for the constitutional conversation, a society will encounter the problem of Babel, in which sentimental exchange is, in some ways, foreclosed upon, leaving some potential gains on the table. For example, if a conversation is dominated by a particular personality, we might expect the constitution that emerges to reflect a tyranny, which is decisive rather than deliberative. If some participants in the conversation are given priority of voice over others, the constitution that emerges might be expected to incorporate hierarchy rather than egalitarianism. If faction develops among the participants of a conversation, producing obstacles to sentimental exchange, the constitution that emerges will exclude some opportunities for mutual gain. The normative content of egalitarian governance structures is located in the constraints placed upon exchange of sentiments as embodied in the rules of conversation, our repertoire. Liberal democracy needs to be government by discussion, such that public ends are agreed upon by consensus, if not unanimity. The political economist describes to the public, as it's deliberating, the constraints that establish the set of available rules, the relevant trade-offs involved in selecting among sets of rules. Then the applied economist, really more like an operations researcher, that person can then assist the agent who has been selected to manage the public means for achieving the agreed upon ends within the set of established rules. If a robust system is put in place, then no one would care if a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden clone were selected for every public office, because every individual would be so tightly constrained by the rules that we have all agreed upon. In the conversation regarding rules, exchange fosters reconciliation among individual and factional differences and preferences pertaining to the choice of ends, our shared goals, and preferences among the rules that will achieve those goals. The parties exchange sentiment, approbation, and disapprobation through our repertoire. Among problems that may arise are that conversation is naturally influenced by social distance. It tends to prefer the local over the Catholic. So the rules establishing who may participate in the conversation have to be agreed upon. Conversation tends to be expressive rather than instrumental. So the rules establishing the substance of conversation have to be agreed upon. Conversation also tends to become less frank and more vernacular. So we need rules establishing the transparency of our conversation. Good conversation includes every individual holding a stake in the outcome of the conversation. It doesn't allow the conversation itself, the means, to take precedence over the ends, the exchange. And it requires that all the relevant knowledge be shared with those who are in the conversation. The problems that arise in conversation have analogies to the problems that emerge in markets. We understand that our social problem is resolved through exchange. In early stages of economic development, exchange exists only as arm's length barters. As specialization develops, more complex exchanges can obtain. However, there can be barriers to consummating exchanges. There can be transactions costs that may impede some exchanges. Money prices help to overcome a lot of those. The firm also helps to overcome transactions costs. However, market participants may also seek out circumstances that foreclose upon some exchanges to their peculiar benefit. So people in the market can try to win more than their fair share and capture rents. The problems that we observe in markets can be analogized to problems that occur in conversations. A shared language is like a shared currency for sentimental exchange. We can better discuss the rules of governance, realizing improvements to corporate action when transactions costs to conversations are overcome. Similarly, by specializing in particular topics, we increase the number of topics that can be discussed. However, party spirit can develop that forecloses upon the exchange of sentiment through the abuse of language. How can a society guard against, on the one hand, opportunism by individuals who want to foreclose upon exchanges, resulting in lost opportunities to some and the capture of rents by others? And on the other hand, attempt to block entrepreneurial actions that would result in more overall exchanges, but that might result in the destruction of incumbent enterprises. We have to get our talk right first to create conversations that are open, instrumental, and transparent. The political economist advises the participants in the constitutional conversation. The applied economist provides assistance to the agent selected by the members according to the rules established at the constitutional level. That applied economist helps the agent to manage the public means such that the constitutionally agreed upon ends are achieved most efficiently within that set of rules, according to established measures of what we think efficiency means. To narrowly define economics as merely a science that studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means that have alternative uses, as articulated by Lionel Robbins, is kind of a distraction for the political economist. There's more important work, more appropriate to our specialization for us to do. Efficiency can only be measured once the set of available means is established for the achievement of an already agreed upon end. So my job is to describe to the public, as it deliberates, the set of available rules, the relevant trade-offs involved in selecting among those sets of rules. I can talk to a Republican candidate for president about trade policy and say, this is the natural outcome of this kind of policy. I can then go to a congressional candidate who happens to be a Democrat and give them the same exact advice, showing them the relevant trade-offs. I can then represent a libertarian candidate, again, re-articulating the same set of trade-offs. The decision of ends to be achieved through formal institutions is determined by the conversation among us. It's my job simply to help you understand and help each of us to understand what the relevant trade-offs are. So individuals do this too. Individuals select their own preferred ends. What is it that you want to do? That's the most direct act of choice. The problem that the individual solves is oikonomic rather than catalactic. Individual preferences cannot always be fully explained and aren't bound by what currently exists. A person might list the pros and cons for a decision available to her, and might even assign measures and weights to each item on her list. And yet in the end, she might choose the alternative with the losing score. She will choose what she wants, accounting for opportunity costs that cannot be articulated. And all the apparatus that she might have used in making the decision becomes immediately unintelligible to an outside observer. The individual is not some sort of a technical instrument for the attainment of some predetermined end. The individual, from the liberal point of view, is her own end. There isn't a social problem involved for a person choosing for herself. There is no optimum that a technician could point to for the individual. The simple act of choosing doesn't imply an exchange. And so the problem that the individual faces isn't catalactic. Robinson Crusoe on the island alone chooses, doing whatever he wants to do. The act of choice, then, we might describe as being reclusive, only focused on oneself. However, a society of individuals is not a means to an end. The society is not a designed instrument for a designated purpose. A society of individuals is a collection of people who recognize opportunities for joint action. No meaning can be attached to the concept of efficiency when looking at this set of individuals who choose together. The individuals who jointly choose the constraints are the same individuals whose actions are constrained, and they are continually engaged in reviewing the performance of those rules. This comes out of the work of Rutledge Vining. There is no social welfare function. There's no equation that can sum up what all of us desire so that some person who knows a lot of math can come in and say, this is what you all should do. It makes the most sense. No, we have a lot of different points of view. Now, some consequences of different set of rules on the opportunities for exchange can be identified, and so Pareto improvements can be proposed and adopted through consensus. The consensus decision is itself the outcome of sympathetic exchange within conversation. The simple fact that an exchange is consummated is sufficient evidence to acknowledge that mutual benefits have obtained, without needing to measure the distribution of those benefits or to compare them intersubjectively. The core problem for the economist is to describe sets of rules that will constrain the behavior of all of us and the relevant trade-offs for alternative sets of rules. The very act of description, though, brings sympathetic exchange into the situation. Just as the individual faces trade-offs when choosing for herself, society faces trade-offs when jointly choosing. And so we could end up with social conflict. The members of society have to reach a consensus. The choice is based on a joint evaluation. This involves the resolution of conflicting evaluations through argument and discussion. The technical problem beyond the measurement and prediction of performance is that of facilitating social interaction and communication that leads to a consensus. Now, when we have communication that allows sympathetic exchanges, that also allows us to make side payments of approbation for whatever policy is under discussion. The goal is always to find ways that man can organize his association with others in a way that mutual benefit from social independence can be maximized. The members then discuss the alternatives and reach consensus. Adam Smith, the founder of economics, praises statesmen and legislators who avoid corruption. Unless disqualified by some corrupting influence, especially a term to the system, a statesman or a legislator can occupy positions of honor that's similar to poets, generals, and heroes. However, corruption can lead leaders astray. One way of doing this is mistaking the means for the end. Undue preference of the means to the end, the distinctions of party spirit, the man of the system or politician, turns away from the proper end of statesmanship, social coordination, and takes misguided steps towards using a system for his own private ends, or ends determined outside of public deliberation. Statesmen and legislators can maintain Adam Smith's approbation when they are limited to the role of facilitating deliberation. The goal then is to sustain that deliberative process. We need transparency. We need to avoid the free rider problem. We need to avoid faction. So politics in and itself is not harmful. What is catalactic, where there is an exchange, where there is a true conversation, politics is not necessarily coercion without justification. Consensus decisions indicate egalitarian exchanges, not coercion. Transparent communication overcomes problems between the legislatures and the executive. Open and plain language, having transparency in our words, is a safeguard against the development of faction and social cartels in politics and social settings. The role of economics is to provide information so that they can talk sense with one another openly. Now, we can't know ahead of time what the outcome of that discussion will be. Informal social exchange is an example of coordination among otherwise free and rival individuals, constrained by ordered patterns of language and practice, our repertoires. Participants in a liberal conversation have to guard against recourse to authorities that are outside of the discussion. To participate in exchange, market, political, or sentimental, within such a group requires the proper use of language within boundaries. Foul language leads to ostracism and the loss of opportunities that include social approbation. People exchange goods and services, political powers, privileges, liberties, and sentiments. We do not exchange goods and services with everyone. Even if costs were so low as to enable us to exchange with anyone, such as becoming more possible through internet retailers, we are regular customers at many establishments. We go to the same coffee shop over and over again. We don't exchange sentiments with everyone, even if we can become friends with anyone through social media. We visit our friends and colleagues and their online posts more frequently than others. Among those with whom a person more frequently exchanges sentiments, party feeling, a certain limited local feeling, distinct from that which connects all mankind together, can develop. We have greater attachment to some people than to others. Some are at a greater social distance than others. Party feeling is reinforced through our shared repertoire. Maintenance of that repertoire can be sufficient to actually hold together an informal social group without any leader, without any kind of association or a faction. The repertoire itself constitutes the social contract. The normative content of egalitarian governance structures can be located in the appropriate conventions for the exchange of sentiments. For example, in economically developed societies, it's difficult to communicate sentiments to every member of society. So we develop a commercial ethic that allows us to interact reclusively towards most other people most of the time, but that's because it's to everyone's mutual benefit. This commercial ethic identifies a set of behaviors that, if violated, are considered foul because they frustrate coordination at the fair, in the market. But the requirements of each person towards each other are minimal in that setting. That kind of interaction requires little collective action, generates few negative externalities. So the constitutional conversation doesn't have to spend very long dealing with commercial matters. Attempts to introduce centralized planning to replace free commerce imagined that positive externalities could be gained by increasing the scope of the constitutional conversation. The task of the economist then is to examine the consequences of a change in the Constitution to identify the relevant opportunity costs. If submitted to the constitutional conversation, the economist would demonstrate that the angelic character requirements that would be necessary for the position of a person who is going to be the central planner, and the potential consequences if a knave should get that position instead, are large. The participants in the constitutional conversation might nevertheless opt to try for the promised gains from central planning. The economist then could remind them that the task assigned to that central planner might be impossible, even if performed by an angel. That's the demonstration of the relevant opportunity costs. We cannot know what sort of rules would emerge from a constitutional conversation any more than we can know what the price will be that will emerge in a market for goods and services. Apart from the market process, prices are not discovered. Similarly, apart from a good conversation, rules that work among us cannot be discovered. This means that even if we could place ourselves behind a veil of uncertainty of some sort, apart from the process of living together, the information needed to discover the rules to govern individual conduct wouldn't become available. So to extend the analogy, the right rules for a society are contingent on specific factors of time and space, just as the discovery of a market clearing price in one period does not guarantee that the same price will clear the market in any other period. So the discovery of rules that achieve consensus in one period cannot guarantee that the same rules will be appropriate to another period. The conversation must be ongoing. Now, that's not to say that the constitutional stage of analysis is irrelevant or impossible. Rather, it is essential and perpetual. In the same way that markets, if freed to competition, gradually correct for past injustices, the constitutional conversation, though we can never place ourselves back behind a veil of uncertainty, can, by practicing the appropriate conventions for conversation, gradually correct for past improprieties. Richard Whately teaches us ways to improve the conversation among participants engaged in the constitutional conversation, such that the resulting set of rules is one that we all agree on and makes us all better off. A shift in ethics deriving from a change in our rhetoric is in part determinative of the set of possible institutional arrangements for a society. The consensus arrived at through conversation replaces the philanthropic conception, often supposed of public decision makers, replaces that with less skeptical theorists. We can think of examples of how experts engage in the public conversation today. For example, is a law requiring the wearing of face masks a good law? For some people, wearing a mask is a central act in the performance of their repertoire. For others, not wearing a mask gains them the approbation of their own tribe. The expert in this case would not make an argument that everyone should wear masks. Rather, the expert would bring to the public in deliberation an impartial description of the opportunity costs entailed in either wearing or not wearing a mask. The public would then discuss. To the extent that the public could come to a consensus, it would remain an intact polis. And within that context, the public may agree, through an exchange of powers and sympathies, upon a shared course of action. We can renegotiate the repertoire to include mask wearing and can transfer disapprobation to those that fail to perform that repertoire appropriately. Every conversation that we come into, every kind of new set of rules that we encounter can be submitted to experts to provide the relevant opportunity costs, to describe to the public what it's going to cost to do one thing or another. But it's always, in a democratic society, the responsibility and opportunity of the public in deliberation to make that final decision, which can then be handed back to administrators to put into effect. I hope that this has been helpful to you in understanding how an expert might appropriately interact with the larger conversation.
Wonderful. Nathan, thank you so much. That was fantastic. It's a great lecture. And I know that we have a few of our BA, MA students here, and there's some folks who are watching this online. If you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask. And if not, I of course always have questions, but I just want to open this space up in case there are questions from anyone. That was a great talk, and it's really helpful to sort of have an idea of how to approach the notion of the expert. I'm wondering.
Experts are given a lot of power, right? And it makes sense to listen to experts, but when experts are given the power of actually choosing policies, of setting the laws, we ought not to be surprised if they choose the laws and policies that benefit them most directly. And so we need some sort of a robust check against that opportunism by experts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because you normally hear if somebody's a scientist and they say, well, global warming is a in part influenced by how humans interact by burning certain, like, let's say, fossil fuels or whatnot. You either have to accept the scientist's position or reject it. And what you're suggesting is we need different ways of deliberating among ourselves, so that we can get away from perhaps the either or, in order to maybe, as I understand what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, to maybe come to a consensus as a social sphere, as opposed to sort of top down, more policy, top down driven policies, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, top down policy gave us eugenics, right? Top down policy, makes broad sweeping changes to society that affect some people more than others. It's not egalitarian.
Right.
That's not democratic. That doesn't mean that we can't have shared policies.
Sure.
It simply means that there needs to be a broader conversation. Now, is Congress that conversation, right? Congress is a formalized way of bringing the conversation into the actual setting of policies, but it operates under the Constitution. But that underneath that Constitution is where I'm really digging. I'm trying to understand, what lies beneath the formal Constitution for any particular polity. It could be the nation, it could be your bridge club, right? What lies underneath that is the way that we talk to each other, the shared repertoire that we have. And if we get to the point where we're not talking to each other in a decent way, then it doesn't matter what happens in Congress. It's not going to have the same kind of egalitarian outcomes. It's always going to be a pitting of some against others, of this faction against that faction.
Yeah.
And as we've moved forward, political tribalism is talked about a great deal these days. It's a really serious problem. When somebody is on a particular cable TV news show and talking to that tribe, somebody from the other tribe could listen in and say, none of what that person is saying makes any sense at all. Well, it does make sense, but you got to know the language, right? And if you want to communicate to people from a different tribe, it pays great dividends to take some time and learn that language and go and talk to them. When I was advising the Democratic candidate for Congress locally, and this is Indiana, I told her, look, what you could do strategically is learn to speak farmerese, right? Learn to speak the tribal language of the local people. That doesn't mean you have to forfeit your preferred set of policies. You can maintain your own set of policy preferences, but bring it in a conversation in a way that other people can understand. Otherwise, we end up talking just straight past one another all the time, right? And instead of having an actual conversation.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And it's something I feel like what you're presenting to us today is something that we need to take very seriously, especially during a time where there's such divisiveness among our, as you call it, tribes, or among, perhaps, and this is a question I want to pose to you. Do you think this is a result of a two-party system, that we're not diverse enough? And as a result, this is one of the negative effects of our lack of political diversity with respect to parties. Is that something right? Or how would you handle that question in terms of our divisiveness and our two-party system? And Alejandro from Chile has a question as well.
Tribalism.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tribalism is fundamental to human nature, right? Now, our inability to maintain a good social repertoire among one another can be in part harmed by the size of the pile that we are trying to agree upon through the political process. The bigger the pile of goodies that's there, the more it becomes an all or nothing contention over control over that pile of goodies. One approach might be to more tightly constrain the scope of what gets distributed through the political process, so that the pile of goodies isn't so big, and then our conversation can revert to something more civil. That's one approach that James Buchanan might have proposed.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. That's a really interesting proposal. Let's go to Alejandro, who is in Chile. He's a part of our BA and MA program. And just so you know, Alejandro, this is live and on broadcast throughout the world. So just so you know that. Okay, go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, hi, thank you for your lecture. It was wonderful. You talked about the things that are like underneath the constitution of the countries. And here in Chile, we're in a state that we're redefining our constitution, like as a society. Most of societies, it's on board, for say it in a way, and we don't want to do it through Congress. We want to do it through like constitutional assemblies. And I guess that my question would be like, what sort of advice would you have for people that are going to lead this very thing you're talking about pretty soon? I mean, what kind of light can you shed, please? Thank you.
Oh, this is a terrific question. And I've been following the situation in Chile just a little bit. The fact that Chile is having a constitutional moment is crucial. What I can recommend to each of those people who are involved there now is to talk to your neighbors, to go and talk with all of your neighbors, especially the awkward ones, the ones whom you might be in disagreement about, and try to find a way to come to a consensus about what kinds of things you want to be done through the government and what kinds of things maybe can be done without the implicit use of force. Constitutions are always flawed, and they're always vulnerable to change. What's most important is that before a national formal constitution is put in place, that there be a shared civic and communal point of view about the goals that Chile as a society wants to achieve. Or more simply, what kinds of things you are willing to give up in terms of your own personal liberties in order to protect against other people exercising theirs. So I think that the situation there will be interesting to watch. I hope the very best for you there. I hope to visit Chile someday and to spend some time there. So I think the most important thing, though, that you can do is to practice good conversation and to require that of those who are involved at the public level, to be suspicious of everybody, especially those from your own point of view, and to be generous towards those who have different points of views.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions that we might have? I know Fiki from Jakarta is with us, and he does some of his research has to do with secularism within the context in relationship to Islam. But good. Then we will, without further ado, without any questions outstanding, we'll just say thank you, and we'll come to an end here. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and for those of you who are supporting what we're doing. It's very important, as you can see, to keep getting information out from experts like Nathan to the public, so that we can be more and more informed, and therefore move more and more, hopefully, towards a better social organization and ultimately a better position for all of us and the world. So thank you so much. And thank you, Nathan. And we're going to close down now. And please join us next month when we have Asfar Hussain, the renowned poet from Pakistan, but who is now in the US as a professor in Michigan. So thank you, and appreciate your support. Thank you again, Nathan.
Thank you also very much. Feel free to get in touch with me.
And you can see Nathan's email address right there. What is that? NDS? Yeah, go ahead.
ndsnow@gmail.com. Thank you all.
Thank you.